When I proposed to my wife, I got down on one knee, but I didn't offer a ring because rings are a slippery slope. The next thing you know, you might be wearing a bracelet or a necklace or even earrings. Plus, if you just conduct yourself like you're married, you shouldn't need wedding rings. Not to mention the Bible explicitly forbids wearing of gold. These are all arguments that I heard many times when I was part of the Pentecostal Holiness Church. In this video, I'm going to talk about what the Bible actually says about jewelry. My name is Cole, and this is Practical Faith. Stay tuned. This is the second video in my Leaving Legalism series, and so if you haven't seen the first one, I would check that one out because in it I lay a bit of a foundation. When I first got saved, I became part of an independent Pentecostal Holiness church, and it was people that were part of that group that first led me to Christ. So for that, I am eternally grateful, and I hope that no one sees this just as an attack on individuals or on the group as a whole, but it's more of a plea to examine what the scriptures actually say. In the church that I attended, and this was 20 years ago, they preached against all jewelry of any kind, including wedding rings. In the first several years, I soaked in pretty much everything that I could get. I believe that some people who wore jewelry could be saved, but if they were sincere and they really prayed through, God would convict them of their jewelry and they would get rid of it. So if you claim to be a Christian and you wore jewelry, you were just an immature Christian. I went to a super conservative Bible school for 3 years, and I remember in one of the summer breaks seeing my president of my class with a class ring. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I felt like he was probably backsliding. After coming home from Bible school, I dated my now wife for about 3 months before I proposed. And like I mentioned, I didn't get her a ring, but I did get her an engagement gift, which was a Coach purse, which ironically was much flashier than any ring that I could have got her. It wasn't until a couple years after we got married that we began to seriously reconsider some of these holiness standards that we were taught. We ended up leaving the church we were at, and we went to a more liberal and yet still very, very conservative Pentecostal church. But in that church, even the pastors had wedding rings. So we talked about it, even prayed about it, and we ended up buying each other wedding rings. And I lost mine, and now I wear this one that I got from Amazon for about $4, not as a symbol of my rebellion, but as a symbol of my union with my wife. For those that say that your conduct should reveal the fact that you're married, I think it's important that you act like you're married, but in our culture, when you have a ring, that shows that you're married. I know that when I was single, if a girl had a ring on, that meant to me she's off limits. And I know that there are people that don't obey the rules, but I do think that you would save off some unnecessary advances by just wearing a ring. But the most important thing is, are we breaking God's command by wearing wedding rings? What about necklaces, watches, bracelets, earrings? Since the Bible is our foundation, let's see what the Bible actually has to say. First, I'm going to look at the two main passages of scripture that are regularly brought up in the New Testament. And the first is in 1 Peter chapter 3. The context is regarding saved wives winning their unsaved husbands to the Lord by their conduct. I'll look at verses 3 and 4. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of the hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. So in verse 3, the NKJV and other versions include the word merely. So don't let your adornment be merely outward. And I think that the inclusion makes a lot of sense because it mentions things like the arrangements of the hair, the wearing of gold, and the putting on of apparel. Obviously, this verse is not a prohibition against wearing clothes. The point is that these outward adornments shouldn't be the thing that stands out about you. If you're going to win your husband to the Lord, it's going to have a lot more to do with your attitude than your external appearance. The other passage is very similar and is found in 1 Timothy chapter 2. I'm going to read verses 9 and 10. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. I'm convinced that the similar language here is conveying a similar message as we found in 1 Peter, that women should adorn themselves modestly and appropriately. This instruction was given at a time when gold and costly apparel were symbols of wealth and status. Sometimes they created unnecessary division within the church. If you check out James's instruction regarding the sin of partiality in James 2, chapter 2, you'll see that he specifically contrasts a rich man who comes in with fine apparel and a gold ring versus the poor man who comes in shabby clothing. Those who were wealthy should minimize this division and the pride that sometimes accompanies status by simply dressing modestly. This doesn't mean that you cannot wear a gold wedding ring to symbolize your union with your spouse. The principle from both of these passages is that you should keep your attire modest, that you should stay free from pride, and that internal values are far more important than external adornment. By all means, if jewelry is going to make you prideful, or if you can't help but be excessive, then just don't wear it. But at the same time, don't be like I was and look down upon everyone else who does wear jewelry as spiritually inferior to yourself, because that is also pride. Probably the most common passage that I've heard referenced in the Old Testament is found in Exodus chapter 32, where the Israelites gave their gold earrings to Aaron, who fashioned the golden calf, a false idol. If they never would have had these earrings, then they never would have made that golden calf. But where did these earrings come from? Exodus 3:22. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing, and shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians. If wearing jewelry or fine clothing was a sin, I don't think God would have told them to wear it. But they did what a lot of us do. They took something good and they corrupted it. But whenever they were chastised, Moses didn't chastise them for having gold jewelry. He chastised them because they made it an idol. There are a couple other passages that I'm not going to mention that are sometimes talked about in condemnation of jewelry, but if you read all of them carefully in context, none of them actually condemn jewelry. A bad person can wear jewelry, but that does not make jewelry bad. In fact, in the Bible, I would say there's probably more righteous people who wear jewelry than wicked people. In Genesis, Abraham's servant gives Rebekah a gold ring and 2 bracelets as a sign of Isaac's intention to marry her. And I would definitely consider Rebekah to be one of these holy women of old that is spoken of in the New Testament. In Song of Solomon, Solomon's beloved is adorned with a necklace and ornaments of gold and silver. In Ezekiel 16, verses 11 through 13, God is pictured as adorning Israel with ornaments, bracelets, necklaces, nose and earrings, a crown, and fine linen, all as symbols of his favor. Genesis chapter 41, verse 42, Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. Proverbs 25, verse 12, Like a gold ring or an ornament of gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. A wise reprover or a wise rebuke is a good thing. The one that I always questioned, even when I believed these things, was the story of the prodigal son. Now, the prodigal takes his father's inheritance and he goes and he spends it wildly on riotous living, and then he comes back home and he's graciously received by the father. And this is what the father does. The father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. When I asked my pastor about this at the time, I think he said something about it being a signet ring, which was just like a symbolic thing, not really meant to be worn. But that's not something that we gather from the text. In the text, it specifically says that the ring goes on his hand, and it's symbolizing favor and acceptance. And I find it hard to believe that Jesus is going to tell this story of the Father and have the Father do something that is sinful. So to recap, we're not ignoring these New Testament passages that have something to say about jewelry. Flashy displays of wealth are a thing and shouldn't have any place in the congregation of God. Wicked people in the Bible wore jewelry. Righteous people in the Bible also wore jewelry. So bracelets, watches, earrings, necklaces, rings, they're not inherently sinful. But like many things, they could become a source of pride. So if a Christian is going to wear jewelry, it shouldn't be excessive. But then the question arises, where is that line to be drawn? I think that's something that every Christian should prayerfully consider. I don't think it is the place of a minister to arbitrarily draw that line wherever they think it is and hold it up as if it is an objective standard from Scripture that we all have to follow, because that leads to legalism. Let me know your thoughts on jewelry in the comments below. If you like this kind of video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and until next time, thanks for watching.